Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on Upptalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say Upptalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you're new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
Now let me go ahead and create a derived data set. I want to create a derived data set with the employee stock grants, which is this one, and I'll say select. I'll just copy this name for the same import of employee stock grants. This is a derived data set. I'll link it to ZF. My derived data set is created, and this is the data in my DDS. The reason I created this derived data set is to talk about a transformation, a stage transformation. If we look at this data, this is how the data is structured, right? It has, for example, for each employee EMP1, it has stocks granted are 100, and then they would get vesting one, which is, let's say they have 100 stocks that will be granted in 2023. Hmm. And as part of vesting 2, let's assume they'll have another 100 stocks. This is so 100 more stocks will be granted in 24. This data is fine, but many times the way we need data is we need data in a single cell, right? For example, instead of this, I would expect data in this format. I have employee EMP1 already granted 100 stocks, and I want to show all these stocks to be granted in a single cell or in a single column. I want 100 here and 100 here. This is grant 1, grant 2, and I want date of 23 here and 22 for here. This is D1 and D2. Usually we do come across requirements wherein we have to change columns into rows, right? For those kind of requirements, we create something called an unpivot stage, right? My data would change from this format to this format. Let's go ahead and quickly look at this. I want to add a transformation. Did I have already done that? I want to add a transformation, and we know that transformations can be added with a stage. I'm adding a new stage, and the stage that I'm adding is unpowered. I'm creating an unpivot stage. Now what is that? I want to unpivot. I want to unpivot the vesting date first. My input field is the vesting date 1, right? Which is this one. I want to unpivot the vesting date 1. Then I also want to include the vesting date 2, which is this one. And we have actually 3 date related fields. We also have vesting date 3, which is this one. I'll add one more cell and I'll call. We have vesting date 3, right? I would call it vesting dates. And my value is vesting date schedule. We have vesting date schedule. I'll add one more cell and I'll add one more cell and then we'll compare it. If you see, this is how my workday has added. Where is that? Let's go ahead and see quantity vesting. If you see, what Workday has done is it has created. What we have said is, for the purpose of this unpivot, we want to include these three input fields: vesting date 1, vesting date 2, and vesting date 3, right? These are the three input fields that have to be unpivoted. And then I have created two fields for the purpose of displaying this data. The first one is vesting dates. I've said vesting dates would be my input fields. Basically everything that vesting date 1, vesting date 2, and vesting date 3, it comes here. And the corresponding date values, they show under this column. Makes sense. It says vesting date as 1 for the first employee is 2023. Vesting date 02 for the first employee is 2024. Vesting date 03 for the first employee is 2025. We have created instead of 3 cells, and we can add more cells as well. But in our case, because there were 3 columns, we just added 3. And we have said instead of this, in terms of output, you always get 2 cells, right? The first one shows the actual labels and the second one shows the actual values. Right? Based on what I select, my values would change. Now I have unpivoted just the date. But corresponding to date, I also need to unpivot the amount, right? Because for vesting date 01, if you see for 01 2023, for first employee, he should be getting 100. I also want to vest these columns or unpivot these columns. Then I'll add one more unpivot stage here. I'll click on this top plus at the top. This adds a new set. Now here I want to select the quantity vesting 01, quantity vesting 02, and then quantity vesting 03. There's a few Mac and I'll mention this. We can create blank. We make the required schedule, and when I do a preview, now if you see, even this has vested. Now for Logan Material, our first employee, E201 we have on vesting date 1 which is 2023, they'll get 100 stocks. Vesting date 2 which is 2024 will get a quantity of 100 stocks. For second employee on date 1, 200 and on and forth. This is our source input. All I have done is for each employee. For employee 1, this is how my data was. It says for employee 1, which is basically here. I said they would be currently getting, they have already got 100 stocks, which is what we are. Quantity granted is 100 on date 1 there, which is January 2023. Right, so 1/20 they'll get 100 more. And 24 they'll get 100 more. And let me add one more for employee 2. They have got 200, they get 200 more on 23 and maybe 150 more on 24. This is how my current data looks. What I've done is I have said taking these dates right. Currently there are only 2 date fields. There could be many more, right? There could be 20 date columns. I've said unpivot these date columns, and in terms of input, I have taken date 1, date 2, right? Which is what I've done here. If I edit this transformation, I've said take these date fields, date 1, date 2, date 3, date 4, whatever are there, and then instead of these being columns, convert them into cells. What did work? They do, it said, and for that it has. I have said these would be the output cells that I'll have. In terms of output, I'll only get 2 columns. This is how it gets. Earlier for employee 1, there was just 1 row. Right now, I have said for employee 1, the quantity granted is 100. On vesting date 1, which is 2023, write a D1, which is 2023, they'll get a grant of 100. On 2023, they'll get a grant of 100. On 2024, which is another row, which is date 2, they'll get a grant of 100. Instead of 1 row, now we have 2 rows, right? Similarly for employee 2, no data is lost during this transformation. I'm just rearranging my data. Right, in our use case, we don't need this, but then this is one stage available. Certain cases it is. It is helpful, right? You want all data in a single cell, right, that you can do further calculations. For that specific reason, Workday has created this transformation on this stage, right? It's called unpivot. That was unpivot stage. What is an unpivot stage? Let me add here. We are continuing with our stages, and the stage we are talking about is unpivot. This stage basically converts fields, which is columns, to rows. We basically add an unpivot stage to consolidate data from 2 or more similar fields into a pair of new fields. The output is always 2. Again, you can only add unpivot stage in the derived data sets. Unpivot stage cannot be added in the base data sets. Cannot be added in base data sets. What all stages have we looked at? We have looked at import, we have looked at parts, we have looked at manage fields, we have looked at union as well. We have also looked at join stage, right? We created a join. We just have a couple more stages. I'll quickly talk about that as well. We have a couple stages of the stage. We have something called a filter stage, and then we have something called a group by stage. Both of them, as the name suggests, are pretty self-explanatory. Let me go back to my data catalog. We can add both these stages in the base data sets. I'll go ahead and add both those stages. We have employees with details. Let me go ahead and quickly do the transformation. I'm going to base data set. I'm doing the transformation. These two stages can be added to base data sets as well as derived data sets. We have already looked at manage field stage right now. Group by fields is similar to our matrix reports, right? What is the purpose of a matrix report? We group data and get the summarized values, right? Group by is exactly same. I want to say, let's say, create a group by, and I can select a specific field or group by fields based on which I want to group my data. For example, I want to group all data for survey in 2022. I'll select here, all right. Now it shows that this base data set has only 1 year, which is 2022, and there are 455, right? It basically allows me. I want to group it based on this question, would you recommend? And it has, if you see, 7 distinct values. It is basically grouping data based on distinct values in that particular cell that I have selected. And this is exactly similar to how we create summarizations in a matrix report, right? Right? And then it shows there are 36 people or 36 rows which have the value 10 in this particular cell. Right? There is only one row which has value 3 and on and forth. Plus, if I want, I can add again additional summarizations. I can, instead of getting the count, which is what is getting me right now, I can also get, say, a max, right? Max within this, some other component, right? There are 36 rows when the answer to this question or this, the value of this particular column is 10. Out of that, the maximum for this component is 10, right? Makes sense. There is only one row which has the value of this cell. For this cell and for that, the maximum is. Out of that one, the maximum is 4 for this particular question. It is basically giving a summarization. It is basically checking data in this cell. Let me open this data set and let's see where do we have 3 in. Would you recommend? Looks like there's just one cell. Let me sort it in ascending order. Looks like there's just one. If you see, there's just one with the value of 3, which is what it gives me, right? And then I have selected 4 for this grouping, find the max of this. In this specific grouping, it is finding the max of this. Similarly, in this grouping, wherein there's just one person, it is finding the max of this. What is max of? Do you want to find your work on TCs? Do you find your work on TCs meaningful? Let's see what is right. Do you find your work in TCs meaningful? Because there's just one row. In that row, the max is 4, obviously. Basically, it is checking in this particular grouping or each of these groupings, the grouping we have created, and then seeing in this grouping what is the max of this row is. Here, basically, it will check these 36 rows right wherein the cell value is 10 and see out of those 36 rows what is the max value of this particular column. Makes sense. Similarly, here it is checking these 1 and 2 rows, this grouping wherein the value of this cell is 5, and then in those 1 and 12 rows, it is checking what is the max value of this particular cell here. Because there's just one row, right? The value of 1 is only that one row would become max, right? As well as min, right? Here, it's just getting us 4. It's exactly similar to how we create matrix reports, right? Matrix report just show you the grouping based on what data is available, right? If I do average, then it will do that calculation. But for max and minimum, it just checks what is the max in that grouping and then gets you data, what is the mean in that grouping and gets you that data. When I say average, that's when it calculates the average. Right here again, average is 4 because there's just one worker or one row. All obviously average will be the same. That is group by fields. Again, if we have to do some summarizations for any requirement, we can do exactly same summarizations in our matrix reports as well. Usually what we do is in our data source. We don't in our Prism data source that we ultimately create. We don't feed summarized data, right? We feed all data and then we get these summarizations through our matrix and trending reports that we would create using those Prism data sources, right? The purpose of this data source is usually not to get summarized data. Using Prism data sources, we create the detailed data and then we create reports based on our requirement to create those summarizations. That was the group by fields, a group by stage. Um, um, it basically enables you to summarize, aggregate multiple values in a data set by specified grouping. And finally, we have something called what happened. And finally, we have something called a filter stage. Again, a filter stage, as the name suggests, is used for the purpose of filtering, right? Right, let me add a filter stage in this because here we have more data and it makes sense. I'll delete this join stage because before doing this join, I want to do another join. I'll any which is need to delete this join will quickly do that. We don't need it, but it would have made no difference. Even after join, I could have done a filter stage right, not that it would have mattered. Filter, as the name suggests, it allows us to do a filtering right. There are two options, if all, which is basically an condition, if any, which is basically an or condition. Basically, I want all employees who are, let's say, in this supervisory org who are also individual contributors. All right, then I can add a filter. Now I can say I want all employees in management level equal to, not equal to this and blah. And let's say managers. I'll say this. And now it is giving me 138 rows, all employees who are managers. And I can add another filter saying that because we have selected all, it is basically an all condition. And I want those employees whose active status is true, right or false or whatever, correct. Now it is giving me only 136, 6 rows instead of 138, wherein it gives me all employees who are true, right? I can come in here. False, right? And now it gives me the other two employees. That was the filter stage. Again, we don't need it. I'll go ahead and cancel it now. We have looked at all the stages. We also have all the data right. Just one more data is left. I also want to import the Prism performance details. You remember we created two reports. One was we have already imported the employee details. Right now, we also want to import the performance details, and that's why I have deleted that join because I first want to join with the performance data with employee data. Let's quickly check what is our report. I think it was employee reviews. This is our report, and I'll quickly create one more table. I want to name it ZIF underscore. Training underscore table. My source is Workday. I'm selecting source and I'm calling it employee performance details. My tag is ZF and create. It is through Workday report and the report is employee reviews. I'll say next it creates those four cells based on whatever is there in that and say after that I want to load data. I think it would be already loaded. Let's open this. Data is not loaded. I will create a data change task. I think once again we have to. This is for 2022 right now. Let's go ahead and load data for 2022 Workday report employee reviews. Next. Next, it does the mapping for us and I'll say next. I'll say save and run. Let's have a look at our table and see if our data is loaded. Oh, I think because I don't have access field when retrieving data from the source. This is what happens whenever there is an error in your data change task, even if, let's say, one row failed. If you remember, we discussed if even in one cell a specific row data type doesn't match, that entire row is not loaded right and Workday creates an error record. What I can do is, it would give me that error record here. Not sure why it doesn't give me. Because none of the rows loaded. That's why it is not giving me. Is it because of the same issue? I think the issue is because I don't have the access. The access, hopefully. Oh, but it is already shared with all authorized users. Field when written. Please review Prism Activities Monitor for more details. There should be one row. I think for 2022, there's one. Oh, there are many, in fact. There are many, in fact, that we have to be able to do that, and we have to be able to do that. Is it the same issue that we faced the other day? Failed when retrieving. Please review Prism. Employee reviews. Fail processing. Complete fail to execute. Is it the same issue that we had the other day? I'm gonna call it a response. I'm calling data. Now what I'm expecting response of fail to execute the registry. Let me create a base data set. Prism employee reviews. Here, I want to run it from 1st of Jan 22 to December 31st, 22. I want to run it now. I want to replace it in append mode. This is a base data set and done. Where is my because I have this tag with base data sets we cannot create tag. Oh, now it's loaded, which is strange if you see. I don't know what is the problem. At this point in time, let me talk about a couple of other simple things. The first one is, if you remember, we mentioned that we would usually use SAFT when we want to regularly load data. Right? For example, on a monthly basis, you want to load employee details or their timesheets, right? And we usually use the file transfer when data is very infrequent. There's no defined frequency and on and forth. What we can do is, if we know, let's say on a monthly basis or on a daily basis or weekly basis, I want to load the report into my base data set right in, let's say in an append mode. Then instead of having to do it manually, and we can still do it manually if there is just one base data set, right? But usually in projects, it is not humanly possible. There could be 10 or 15 or more base data sets. What we do is we go ahead and create a schedule. I can come in here and I can go to dataset and I can go ahead and edit the integration details. When I initially created this base data set, I created an integration, but then I said only run it once, right? Now I want to edit that integration details and say, instead of only running it now, once I want to run it on a daily basis or a weekly basis, I can go ahead and create a schedule, right? and then I can define the recurrence with which this integration has to run. This is with respect to a base data set, but with respect to a table, you know that we don't create a base. We don't create this integration schedule right. Instead, what we do is we create a data change task. How do we create a schedule for a data change task? For data load, if it is a data set or specifically base data set, we can create an integration schedule. Right. And how do we do that? From the related actions of BDs. From the related actions of the BDs, we'll go to data set and then we click on edit integration schedules. Edit integration schedule. But for a table, we know that we don't create an integration schedule at all, right? We do that with the help of a data change task. What we'll do is we'll go to the data change task. Which one is ours? These are ours, right? Employee reviews and something we created. Let's say for this data change task, I want to define a schedule. I'll come in here. I'll click on the data change task and you can edit. I'll click on edit, right, and here I can go ahead and define a schedule for my data change task. I can come in here, I can select a source. I'm saying this is employee reviews. I'm not sure what is that. I'll define the operation. I'll specify the target table. In my case, it is, let's say this one. I'll select the target table, which I have already created. Let's say I'm saying this. Next, I'll say confirm, and then I'll do the mapping. And once I do the mapping and next, it will go ahead and create that data change schedule for me. It will say with what frequency and on. Currently, it's not giving me that because I just randomly selected some right. It's not giving me that mapping right. In the case of data change table, we go to the data chain task that we initially created. When we created the table right, we double click or we click on the related actions. The specific data change task. We click on the related actions and then we can either do now, we can look at the data change task that we created earlier. We can delete the data change task. If you have to delete a table, right, you'll not be able to delete the table because Workday would say that there is a data change task associated with it. If you have to delete the table, first you'll need to delete the associated data change task and then you'll be able to delete the table. And that's why it makes sense that when you create that initial data change task, Workday would give a default name. But give it a proper name that you can later identify your data change task. Else Workday gives a random name just to make it easy for you. It always makes sense to give a valid data change task. We have already created our base data set. It has loaded our data for 2022. Yes, let me quickly review that. Now I want to load data for 2021. I'm just checking one thing. If you remember, I said that at the maximum you can see 20K rows and I was not able to find that. That's because Workday has now changed the layout. If you click on this default example, it will show you. Here you can configure. You don't want to see any example rows or you want to only see the default example rows. It returns you first 20K rows. Actually, now what Workday has done is it has added another configuration. It was supposed to go live in September. At least that's what Workday documentation shows. I don't know why it's not showing in our tenant, but what you can do is there's a third option as well, wherein you can also configure which rows you want to see. It's like a filter. You can add a filter. For example, you want to see specific data for if there are more than 20,000 rows. Obviously, Workday doesn't show everything and it shows the first 20. If you want to see some specific data, you can. You can add that filter and Workday would show you that example data, those specific rows. That's the latest enhancement that Workday has delivered. But you can access all of that using here, and then it's exactly similar to how you add a filter stage. That's exactly similar. All right, I want to come here and I'd also want to load data for 2021 and 2020. I would come here, dataset. I want to run integration. I'm not creating any integration schedule. I'll say, oh, does it load data? For I think it has loaded the data twice, if I'm not wrong. It has loaded the data twice. What do we do? What do we do? I want to truncate the data. With Badiz, can we truncate specific data or full data? I think it's full data. I can only delete full data. Now when I go in here, let's see if my is it not working. I'm not sure. What is this connection? Exception, unable to verify credentials for system account. I'm not really sure. Why is this happening? Just to be. I think it would be much easier if I create a new base data set and load all data together right from 2000 instead of having to go through this. I want to load employee reviews. I want to load this data from 2020, 2021, 2022, December 21st. I want to load all 3 years data in a single go. You should. Let's see if our data is already loaded. Oh, I'll quickly check the number of records, which is fine. There are 3 years worth of data. It is giving me around 200 records. I'll quickly add another stage here, manage fields. I don't want to see all these fields going forward. I would remove the WPL load ID and done. My base data set is created. I have already created, or we have already created our derived data set, right? Wherein we were doing our transformations, which is import of employee details. Let's go ahead and open that. First, I want to do a join. I want to join the employee details with their corresponding performance details, right? But for doing that, we know that we have to do one more task, which is how would we join our data based on employee ID plus the year, right? I want for 2D1578 to be joined with only 1578, given the year is 2021, right? Or given the year is 2022. That's how I want the join to happen. But for doing that, I need to first truncate and get the year out of it, right? I would add one more field. I'm calling it year. I'll go to function library. Let's quickly see what field type this is. This is a field of type text. I'll come in here. I want to go to text. And I want to get a substring. I want to get a substring. I can see the formula here. I'll click on plus, which adds it here. If I add a square bracket, now it allows me to select the fields. I want to get a substring of effective date, and I want to get it from 0 with character till character number 4. Right. I'll click on enter. Now it has got me 2021. Right. This data is ready. What I also need to do is, because I need to join it with employee performance details. And how would I join that? Based on the year of the performance, right? Now for doing that in this data set, I can use either the year start or the year end. I'll basically take one of these columns. convert that only to 2000, the year value, or extract the year value of it. And then I'll do a join. For doing that, I'll have to create a derived data set, obviously, or let's do it here just for the sake of it, because we can add any calculated fields anywhere. This will save us the time of creating a new derived data set. We already have the Manage Field stage. I want to add a new calculated field here. I want to call it again. Let's go to Function Library. Let's come here. This is a field of type date. Let's go to Function Library. Let's see what functions are available here. I have extract function. The extract is a row function that returns the specified portion of a date time value. Basically, I only want to extract the year. That's what I'll do. I'll add this year and I want to extract. That's what I'm selecting. Let's say, oh. Ex I want to extract year from review period and date. There is an error, which means this is. If there is an error, it will show you that calculation error. The reason it gave me error is because this is what I had done. If your formula is incorrect and when you click on enter, it will show you that there is an error. That's because I had not used formula correctly. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We'll look at some of the other functions as well, but they're all very self-explanatory. Now I have extracted here. But I'm not sure if we can convert. We can do a comparison. If you see here if I go to field, it is a field of type integer, but here it is a field of type. When we do a join work, they would not allow us to join a field of type integer with a field of type. What I'll have to do is, if I directly click on edit right now, if you see, I'll not be able to see that year field. Because all transformations that I do here will come out as the output of this stage, right? Including all the calculated fields. All the changes that I do here in this particular stage, or in any stage for that matter, can only be accessed in the stage next to it, right? That's why if I go here, currently, I cannot see the year field because year has been added as part of this very stage. I want to make changes to year. I'll have to add another manage field stage. Here, if you see, year is visible. Now I can go ahead and convert it to text. The reason I'm doing that is because when I do the join next time, then I'll be able to do a join using employee ID. I'm going to add this employee ID with this employee ID here, right? And this year with the year here. Basically, what I want is I have two data in my DDS1. I have employee details. Employee, their first name, their date of birth, their gender, and on and forth. Plus, I have the year as well, which is basically what I've extracted. Right. In the second one, I have again employee ID. Right. I have their performance, the performance rating. Right. which is outstanding, whatever. I have a performance. I had the start date of that performance review and the end date, right? Basically, what I want is I want to get a combined data, where then I'm joining all data in here with all data in here. But for doing that, what I wanted is I want employee 1. If you see here for each employee, there are multiple rows. Right? Employee 1 data as of 2021, employee 1 data as of 2022, and on and forth. If employee 1 has 3 records, because I have extracted data for 2020, I want data to be joined for that specific year. I want this row to be joined with this row, which is for 2020. For that, I'll do a join using this with this and this with this. Makes sense. That's why I've done the whole conversion. Now, one thing to remember, in a base data set, we can simply go ahead and convert a numeric value to a text value using the Manage Field stage. Right. That's what we are doing. This was a numeric value and I've converted it into a text value. But in once, I could have done the same thing in my derived data sets as well later on. Right. When you do it in a derived data set, there is a function called cast function. Cast function allows you to cast a numeric value to a text value and on and forth. Let me quickly show that. If I go to functions library, I'll add one more calculate just for the purpose of it. If I go to functions library, there's something called cast function. And if I come here, if you see, cast is an expression that converts a value to a different type. I can, for example, take a numeric value, convert it into a long, and on and forth. But if you see, I can do the same thing here directly. Correct. In base dataset, we can do it directly using Manage Field stage. But if you have to do it later in your downstream, then you'll have to use this cast function. Makes sense. Now my base dataset is ready. I made a mistake. I don't need this. Cancel. One more thing. Good that it happened. And if you see, I had created this stage right. And later on, in this stage, I added the year. Later on, I added a new stage right, wherein I simply converted it from numeric to text or whatever. I did some other transformation. Now I go back and add one more calculated field here or make some stages, some changes in the upstream, which is what I've done, right? I've simply added one more call field. When I do that, Workday would give me a warning saying that some changes have happened in the downstream. In the upstream, it is giving me a warning. It doesn't directly go ahead and include this calculated field in here. It gives me a warnings. And when I come here, if you see, this field is currently hidden. Workday automatically doesn't include if you have added any new fields in your table or in your base data set. The same thing happens in your derived data set as well. Workday shows you a warning, hides that field by default. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and make it visible. Right. That if you make any changes in your report or in your file, if your source changes, that Manage Field stage shows your warning saying that some changes have happened. That way you can keep track. You don't have to manually remember, especially with respect to large data sets. Now I know this was not required. I'll come in here and I'll go ahead and delete this field. And now my warning disappears. Now my base data set is ready. I would come to my DDS import of employee details, wherein I have my primary pipeline, wherein I've just loaded employee details. I've added a manage field stage, wherein I have basically hidden all unnecessary. Plus, I have also added a new calculated field to get a substring of the year. Now I'm ready to do a join. I'm doing a join. I am selecting. Whenever you delete a join stage, we just deleted our join. Workday doesn't delete the pipeline. That pipeline is still available. If you want, you'll have to specifically delete. But I'm not going to delete it because I know I'm going to use this pipeline later on, right? If you want, if you see it is showing up a warning saying that one pipeline is disconnected, and the reason is we deleted that join. I can go in here and I can delete this pipeline if I want to, right? But that is not what I want. I'll go back. I'll add a new join. We don't need this pipeline for now. I'll not select this one. I'll add another pipeline, and the pipeline that I'm adding is basically employee performance details. New, this one. I'll add another one, and I'm saying select. And this is where I would need the data. I want to join employee ID with employee ID here. Plus, I want to join year with year here. And that's why I did that transformation. I'll select everything in here. In my primary pipeline, in my secondary pipeline. I don't need employee ID. I'll remove employee ID. I don't need the year as well because I already have it from my primary pipeline. I can do a preview now. And now everything is added. This employee doesn't have any rating for 2022. Now I have, the number of rows doesn't change. It will affect. It will be followed. If I just do a join with employee ID, the number of rows will change. Right. Right. Because I'm doing a proper matching for each person. There is 3 years. It's doing a proper matching for 2021. It only maps it to the 2021. If you see the performance data for 2021, if it is 2022, it only matches to 2022 performance data. If it is available, that's why my number of rows do not change. And I'll say done. Now I have done a join and I have also extracted the performance data. Now I'll go ahead and do a new join, wherein I'll also extract the survey results. Alright, I'll do a new join this time. You can do any number of joins if you want. Now I'll select the pipeline that we already have selected earlier, and this time I'll again do with employee ID. I'll also do it with year. Here, in our import of survey details, we have not extracted the year. Well, come in here. Import of employee. Where is that perceptors? Import of employee survey details. I'll have to edit this transformation. The reason it's not available, if you see when I'm trying to do a join, The reason it is not available, even though we have the year here, is because here is yes. Here is a text here. It is numeric. Let's see if I can change the field type. It's available to me. That's perfectly fine. I'll say previewed. I'll say done. I'll say saved. I'll have to cancel this. I'll have to do a new join. I'm not sure if we'll have to delete it. Let's quickly check that. Why is it giving me 2 employees? This is the second. We have to select employee space. This one. And then we have here. Basically, what we'll have to do is we'll have to delete this and rejoin it. Any changes that we do don't automatically show up. Now, when I do a new join, then it will show me the latest changes that I have done to the data set. Basically, I've changed the year from numeric to text. I'll add another pipeline, which is let me copy this and I'll search for it. This one. Select. I want to join this employee ID with this. Now here is also visible. I want to join this year with this. Once again, I want to select everything from here. You have everything. And from my secondary pipeline, I do not want to select employee ID. I don't want to select here. I don't want to select here everything else. I don't want this employee ID as well. Right. I'll save preview and I'll say and I'll go ahead and save my data set. Let's go ahead and look at the lineage and see what all we have done till now. I'll come in here. Let's look at the lineage. This is what we did. This is our employee details, which acts as our primary pipeline throughout. Right. We imported the employee details through work from Workday. Employee. This is our employee details, right? The one in the middle. This is our employee details, which is acting as our primary pipeline. We imported this data from Workday. And then we created a derived data set using this imported data as our primary pipeline for our derived data set. Then what we did is we also imported the survey details. We also imported the performance details, which is also imported through Workday. And then we did a join with the employee details. The third set of data that we loaded is the employee survey. Now for employee survey, we loaded this data through table as well as through base data set. In table, we have a 2020 and 21. In base data set, we have at 2022. Here we created a derived data set. And what stage did we use here? No, we did a union right. Join right. Because it is exactly same data. We basically have to club that data right here. The reason we created two different sources is that we could see union right. We did a union and then that union we did again. Join here. This is what has our combined data. This is our finalized data sets. Now we'll go ahead and apply security. But before doing that, let's quickly look at a few other things. We have already spoken about the data change task schedule, right? How we can create a schedule as well as how we can do an integration schedule for dataset, right? For data load, we create something called data change task schedule. For our table and for dataset, we create an integration schedule. Let's quickly talk about the table and data set field types, though we already know about it. We have, we create, we create, we create, create, we create table and data set field types. What is the purpose of a field type or data type? It basically does two simple things, right? The field type of a table or a data set just does two things. As you mentioned, it basically identifies what kind of values the field can hold, right? Basically, type of data, as you mentioned, it basically determines what kind of values can that cell or that column hold. And then the second thing, it determines what functions or what calculations can use the field as an argument. What kind of prism calculated fields can we create using that field as an argument, which is basically the exact same thing as a custom report, right? We can only do some calculations or some calculated fields using some field types. A field type basically does two things. It determines what data can your field hold and what arguments can that field be used in. Now, the field type is determined based on a few different factors, right? If we are creating a table, what are the different ways for creating a table? I can create a table manually, right? When table is created manually, how is the field type determined? First, if I'm creating a table manually, which means I'm adding all the columns manually, right? When I do that, I would be specifying what field type a specific column is. When I create a table manually, when I say manually, I'm not using a Workday report. I'm not using a file. I'm saying create table. I'm adding field 1 which should be of type text. I'm adding field 2 which should be named A, B, C or type numeric and on and forth. When I create a table manually, obviously I'll define the field types for each of the fields that I add, right? Now, when you load data, what do you think? What would happen when you load data into this table? let's say into this table using a delimited file, FTP file or file on your system, what would happen? In terms of data upload, that's perfectly fine. It creates a primary pipeline. Next, in either of these cases, when uploading data, does it check anything? Let's say I have created a table with 10 cells or 10 columns or maybe 5 columns. And now I'm uploading data through a file which has some 100 rows or 1000 rows. What would happen? What would Workday check before uploading the data? What would Workday check before? Workday. Let's say you have already also done the mapping. Your table that you have created only has 2 columns, row 1 and row 2. This is all your table has, right? Now you're loading data from a file which has, column 1 and column 2, right? Now you're loading the data through a file which has some 10,000 records, right? Just 2 columns of data. Now it first loads column 1 or it first tries loading row 1, right? It checks, is the column of row 1 validated against the field type here? Let's say this is a field of type text and the row 1 you're loading here it has, let's say this is field of type numeric, right? Or an integer. And the row 1 that you're loading has the first cell, some A, B, C. It validates the data in each row and each cell against the schema of the table. Right. It validates the data against the defined schema. Right. 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 What happens if the validation fails? Here, it is checking that the data to be loaded in this column is numeric, but the row that you're loading it has some alphabetic character. What would happen? It's a complete null, Julie. If you remember, when we discussed tables, we said even if one cell fails, even if there are 100 columns in here, right? Right. If you remember, this is how a table and a data set differs. Even if, let's say, your date loading data for 100 columns, 99 columns, the validation runs perfectly. Only in a specific column, the schema doesn't match. Workday doesn't load that row at all. Right. If the validation fails, if the value for a field doesn't match the field type or maybe it is still date, but the date format is not matching. If you remember, with respect to date, we also have to define the date format or maybe other field parameters are not matching. If the value for a field it doesn't match the field type or other field parameters. For example, date format. Then what does Workday do? Then Workday, it basically marks the entire row as invalid. It doesn't include the row in the table. What does Workday do? We saw that error when we were trying to load right. Workday creates similar error file. This is exactly similar to how an error file is created in an EB. Right? It says this particular, there are 10 rows that have failed. And when you download that error file, it will show you those comments. Why those 4 failed? A Workday basically marks the entire row as invalid and doesn't include that row in the table. Workday instead sends the row to an error file that can be downloaded. With respect to table, there's no concept of a null when the field type doesn't match, right? The entire row gets discarded. Now what happens, let's say, when you're creating a table or a base data set directly through an external file where then you have not defined the schema beforehand, right? If you remember, when we create a table, we have the option of selecting a file directly and based on the columns in the file, and similar is the case for base data set as well, right? Based on the column in the file Workday. Auto Workday then creates the table and the base data set. How do you think Workday determines the field type when we are loading data through or when we are creating these objects through an external data directly? When you create a data set or basically table using an external data. And this is what I mean. If it is confusing you, I come here. For example, I want to create a base data set directly from a file, right? Like, or I want to create a table directly from a file upload. Here, I have not defined a schema beforehand, right? Based on the data in that file upload, Workday determines the schema, right? Right? This is what I mean when I say creating a table or a base data set using an external data. When you create a data set or a table using external data, then Workday simply attempts to guess the field type of each field by examining some of the data. If your data, let's say, have 1,000,000 records, I'm just giving an example. Obviously, Workday would not check for each column all 1,000,000 rows for that column. Right. It just examines the first sample data. And based on that, it determines this should be field of type text. This should be field of type numeric. Workday simply guesses. And that's why we have that manage field. Even after your dataset is created, then we see this is not the right field type. Then we can obviously go ahead and change that field type, right? However, you can change the field type if Workday assigned the wrong field type. When you load an external data, still Workday would determine the field type. But then obviously you can always go ahead and change it. Now what happens when you create a table or a data set using a custom report? It's the same thing again. I think the schema will be coming from the custom report. But the problem is Workday doesn't support all field types that are supported using a custom report. For example, Rich, next we can in a custom report, we can show notes and comments, right. But that is something which Workday doesn't support. What happens is all those field types that Workday supports, Workday or Prism supports, Workday maps the Workday field types to Prism field types, or basically your data field types. And what are those mappings? Let's quickly. What all field types did we see when we created a table? We have created some text integers along. We have created a text. We have created a date. Let's go in sequence. Right. We saw we have instance fields. Prism supports instance, and instance is single instance. And then we have multi-instance. Right. Then Workday also has Boolean. If you remember, this is a field of type Boolean. Prism also supports field of type Boolean. Then it also supports fields of type currency. These are all field types that Prism supports, right? Not in terms of your Workday report. Then we have a numeric. And then we have other numerically related fields. We have long integer double. Have I covered everything? That's how a Workday supports. And now let's see how does Workday mapping happens. Your Workday report field types to Prism field types. Let's say the field type of your Workday report is text. Which field type would it be mapped to in Prism? It will be text. Let's say the field type in report is rich text, which is basically a comments. Which field type would it be mapped to in Prism? Probably text. Because Workday Prism doesn't support that field type, Prism doesn't map it to anything. It is basically not supported. Anything which is not. What happens if you're loading data through a Workday report and it has rich text or any field type that Prism doesn't support? It's Workday would. Prism will simply exclude that particular column. Similarly, date gets mapped to date. Currency gets mapped to currency. Boolean gets mapped to Boolean, both single instance and self-referencing instance. Right. We have two types of instance fields. Both of them gets mapped to instance. Any multi-instance gets mapped to multi-instance. Numeric field in Workday reporting can get mapped to numeric integer on long based on the type of data. Date time zone. If any Workday only supports date, this is important. When I say Workday, I mean Prism. If it is date, it gets mapped to date. However, if it is date plus time zone, or only time it is not supported. We have already spoken about the null values, right? What can be null in a table? Basically, let's look at a data set. What are the ways that a data set can have null value? First, is this no data in that particular cell? Right. In row 1, column 1 is loaded. Column 2, there's no data. And that's why, because there's no data, Workday simply loads it with null. Right. The first option is there is no data. The second option is the data is there, but not in the valid format. Right. On a data set. The second option is the field type doesn't match. And third, you have created some Prism calculation and the output of that Prism calculation is basically blank. You can also get null through using Prism calculation. Now let's look at table. In a table, What happens when a field type format doesn't match? Will it still load null value? No, I don't think. If a field type format, we have already discussed this. If a field type format doesn't match in a specific cell of a specific row, then that entire row is discarded. Right? In table, there's no null value when the field type format doesn't match. Obviously, in table, we don't even do any Prism calculations. Right? All Prism calculations are done in either base data sets or we can do in derived data set. The only way a value can be null in table is that when there's no actual value. Right. For example, one employee, there's no date of birth. Date of birth is missing. Only in that case there can be null value in a table when there's no data for that particular cell. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.